Tonight, high drama. Skydiver Felix Baumgartner jumped from 24 miles up and landed safely. Mark Strassman on the extraordinary 10-minute flight.
I think the most exciting moment was when I was standing outside on top of the world.
He served 30 years in the Senate and was rarely out of the spotlight. Cheryl Atkinson with a look back at the life of Arlen Specter, who died today. Election day is about more than just the presidency. In 3 states, a chance to vote on the recreational use of marijuana. Barry Peterson reports. And Shuttle Endeavor, a late arrival at its new home. Ben Tracy on the slow crawl through the streets of Los Angeles.
This is the CBS Evening News.
And good evening, everyone. I'm Jeff Glor. In the sky over New Mexico today, a man jumped from 24 miles up and broke the sound barrier on the way down. A first. Felix Baumgartner broke that barrier by more than 100 miles an hour, then landed with ease. With details, here's Mark Strassman.
Release. Felix Baumgartner climbed into the stratosphere, more than 24 miles above New Mexico's desert. The 43-year-old Austrian skydiver was about to become a human missile and plunge farther and faster in free fall than anyone in history.
Everything is in the green, doing great.
His ascent had lasted 2.5 hours in a capsule hoisted by a 55-story helium balloon rising 1,000 feet a minute. The only hitch, Baumgartner's visor fogged up when his helmet's heater stopped working.
This is really serious, Joe. I do not think I have safe heating.
Joe Kittinger in Mission Control was the voice in Baumgartner's ear.
There it is. There's the world out there.
In 1960, Kittinger, then an Air Force captain, set the free fall record with a dive from 102,000 feet. He spent 4 years helping train Baumgartner for this moment, the plunge from 128,000 feet. Within 30 seconds, Baumgartner's preliminary speed topped out at 833 miles per hour, the first human in free fall to break the speed of sound. But there was trouble and drama. For about 10 seconds, he went into a potentially catastrophic flat spin, spinning like a top. He regained control back in a head-down controlled position to the relief of everyone in Mission Control. His free fall lasted 4 minutes and 19 seconds, more than 1 minute short of Kittinger's record before his chute opened on schedule. No Olympic gymnast has ever stuck a landing quite like this.
I would love, in 40 years, sitting at the same spot that Joe Kittinger is sitting here, and there's a young guy sitting right next to me and asking for advices because he wants to break my record.
Felix Baumgartner, the man who fell to earth today like no one ever has. Mark Strassman, CBS News, Atlanta.
Coincidentally, on this day in 1947, a 24-year-old American test pilot named Chuck Yeager became the first person to break the sound barrier in a plane, a Bell X-1 experimental. In campaign 2012 now, both President Obama and Mitt Romney are preparing for Tuesday's second presidential debate. No fundraisers, no major appearances, mostly study. While that takes place, Republicans continue hammering the president on the administration's handling of the attack on the U.S. consulate in Libya. Jan Crawford is in Washington and has more on that. Jan?
Well, Jeff, to say that the stakes are high in Tuesday's town hall debate could well be an understatement. The president's performance, of course, in that first debate was widely criticized. Romney surged in the polls, and he now holds a slight lead over the president. Under pressure to turn it around, Mr. Obama will have to defend his response to last month's attack in Benghazi, which killed 4 Americans, including U.S. Ambassador Chris Stevens. The administration is under increasing criticism for initially refusing to call the attacks terrorism. In an exchange with Bob Schieffer on Face the Nation, Senator Lindsey Graham, a senior member of the Senate Armed Services Committee, was harsh.
I think they've been misleading us, but it finally caught up with them.
Well, that is a very serious charge that you've just leveled, Senator Graham. Are you saying that the administration deliberately misled the American people to make it look as if terrorism is not as much of a threat as apparently it is?
Either they're misleading the American people or incredibly incompetent. They're very political when it comes to foreign policy.
Well,
when something goes bad, they deny, they deceive, and they delay.
Libya became an issue last week on the campaign trail, especially after Thursday's vice presidential debate, when Joe Biden said the White House wasn't informed of multiple requests for more security at the consulate.
Well, we weren't told they wanted more security again. We did not know they wanted more security again.
Obama campaign advisor David Axelrod tried to deflect criticism Sunday by pointing the finger at Romney.
From the beginning of this issue, before any facts were known, he was cravenly trying to exploit it. And look, that's politics.
Now, for much of the past month in his campaign rallies, Romney hasn't really been hitting the administration's evolving response to those attacks, although he sure did at the end of the past week. And then, Jeff, today, the slain ambassador's father weighed in, telling Bloomberg News in a phone interview, and this is a quote, "It would be really abhorrent to make this into a campaign issue." Jeff?
Jan Crawford, thank you. Joining us now is our political director, John Dickerson. He's in Washington. John, a lot of discussion of Benghazi right now. On Election Day, how much do voters typically factor in foreign policy?
Well, in this election where voters have told us consistently that they care the most about jobs and the economy, that's likely to be the big issue on everybody's mind. The political danger for the president, though, about the Libya issue is that the Romney campaign is trying to attach it to a larger critique of this administration, that on issues from Libya to the economy, they are out of ideas, that they are not on the case, that they've not been showing leadership. So in that way, it's a way for Romney to make a case about the administration as a whole, even though it's on an issue that will not be front of mind for voters.
Let's talk about the Electoral College map now, if we could, for just a moment. What does the math look like right now for each candidate?
The math favors President Obama at the start. There are more states that he is likely to win in his column than for Mitt Romney. Then when you look at the battleground states, the president has more pathways to get to that magical number of 270. So, for example, he could lose Florida, Ohio, and Virginia to Mitt Romney, and still there are enough battleground states that he could cobble together that 270 number. For Mitt Romney, really, things have been going better recently in Colorado and Florida. That helps him erase the president's advantage in the Electoral College. And so it all comes down to Ohio. Romney has been there 4 out of the last 5 days. And the president is paying close attention to the 18 electoral votes there. So we're at another election in which we're all talking about Ohio.
John Dickerson, thank you. Longtime Pennsylvania Senator Arlen Specter, who at the end of his career switched sides from Republican to Democrat, died today at the age of 82. The cause of death was cancer, a disease he'd been fighting for years. Cheryl Atkinson has more.
During most of his 30 years in the Senate, Arlen Specter was best known as a moderate Republican, serving on the powerful Senate Judiciary Committee, where he's remembered for his opposition to conservative Supreme Court nominee Robert Bork in 1987.
And the concern I have is, where's the predictability in Judge Bork?
And his aggressive questioning of Anita Hill during the Supreme Court nomination hearing for Clarence Thomas in 1991.
Well, when you say a number of things might occur, what sort of things?
He was a ranking member who quickly climbed the political ranks to become Pennsylvania's longest-serving senator.
I won the election because of my attention to Pennsylvania over 24 years.
Even before coming to Congress, Arlen Specter had already made a name for himself as Philadelphia's district attorney, gaining national attention in the 1960s when he served on the Warren Commission, which investigated the Kennedy assassination, and he's credited with co-authoring the single bullet theory. First elected to the Senate in 1980, Specter won 5 terms until he announced he was switching parties in 2009.
As the Republican Party has moved farther and farther to the right, I have found myself increasingly at odds with the Republican philosophy and more in line with the philosophy of the Democratic Party.
2 years later, he ran for re-election as a Democrat and lost in the primary, putting an end to his long-standing political career and jump-starting his return to his other loves, the law and stand-up comedy. He recently appeared at Caroline's Comedy Club.
I've been in the Senate for 30 years, practicing comedy.
During his time in Congress, his biggest battle was cancer. He overcame a brain tumor, non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, and was recently diagnosed with a new form of the deadly disease, which he confirmed in a statement. "I'm battling cancer," he said. "It's another battle I intend to win." Cheryl Atkinson, CBS News, Washington.
In Pakistan, growing demonstrations in support of the 14-year-old girl shot and critically wounded by the Taliban. Tens of thousands rallied in Karachi today for Malala Yousafzai, shot on her way home from school 5 days ago. She remains in critical condition tonight, but doctors say Malala did breathe on her own today when they briefly removed her ventilator. Yesterday, she moved her limbs. The United Arab Emirates is sending a plane outfitted as an air ambulance if doctors send her abroad for treatment. Relations between neighbors Turkey and Syria are growing more tense tonight, with Turkey today closing its airspace to all Syrian aircraft. A human rights group accuses the Assad government of using cluster bombs in its fight against the rebels. Those weapons are widely banned around the world because of the danger they pose to civilians. More than 32,000 people have been killed in Syria since the revolt against Bashar Assad erupted 19 months ago. Still ahead on tonight's CBS Evening News, the shuttle Endeavor's slow roll to its final home. Hot propositions on the ballot, and not just for medical use. And 9 months after the Costa Concordia ran aground, preparations to move the wreck. The Navy says it's investigating why two of its ships collided in the Atlantic Ocean off the coast of Florida yesterday. Pentagon correspondent David Martin reports the submarine USS Montpelier had part of its rudder sheared off when it struck the USS San Jacinto. No injuries are reported. The sub is now limping back to port. This past January, the cruise ship Costa Concordia crashed into the rocks off the coast of Italy, killing 30 people and forcing 4,200 to abandon ship. The final salvage operations begin later this week as the captain heads to court charged with manslaughter. Arlen Specter tells us the captain also has a suit of his own.
The captain who turned the Costa Concordia into this is suing the owners for wrongful dismissal. Given that the salvage operation will cost $300 million, he's unlikely to be getting any back pay. By the end of the coming week, there will be more than 450 workers at the site, including 100 divers. Anchor points are being drilled into the seabed to hold the enormous chains that will be used to roll the ship off the rocks where she is lodged. Buoyancy tanks 11 stories high will be welded onto the sides. The rock that was stuck in the hull when the ship hit a reef has been removed.
The total was about 95 tons of rock that we took out, and we took it out in 3 sections. So it's quite a large rock.
95 tons of rock was stuck in the side of that ship.
Yeah, just the one part of it.
The salvage men describe the effort as off the scale of anything ever attempted before.
It's a challenge, and it's the high point of all of our lives, I think. There'll be nothing else like it afterwards, and there's been nothing quite like it before.
Remarkably, there has been no pollution in the marine reserve around Giglio Island. But just in case, divers have transplanted rare and protected giant clams to a site well away from the salvage operation. Pulling the liner off the rocks and floating her away is scheduled to take 260 working days, but the work depends on the weather, and it's not always like this. The seas around Giglio can turn violent in the winter. Everything that could break loose in bad weather has been cut away. Luxury transcended by the brute force required to prepare the Costa Concordia for her final cruise to the scrapyard. Arlen Specter, CBS News, Giglio Island, Italy.
Next on tonight's CBS Evening News, a proposal to legalize marijuana for recreational use. Colorado is not only a presidential battleground state, it's also on the front lines of an effort to legalize marijuana for recreational use. It's a question for voters there and in 2 other states, Washington and Oregon. In Colorado, Barry Peterson reports polls show there's a good chance voters will say yes.
So this is Jezebel.
This is Jezebel.
Wanda James is readying her new Denver restaurant. She and her husband Scott once ran a marijuana dispensary and marketed foods with marijuana in them. Now, they're active supporters of a state constitutional amendment to make it legal in Colorado for adults over 21 to possess 1 ounce of marijuana and grow up to 6 plants for personal use.
If you would like to come home and have a joint and relax with your wife or your husband, I see absolutely no issue with that whatsoever. There are more ways to relax than just having someone have a can of Coors or a Jim Beam.
Colorado is already one of 17 states that allow marijuana for medical use. With more than 500 dispensaries and carefully monitored growers, the business pumps $11 million a year into Colorado state coffers. Proponents argue taxes from wider marijuana use would generate millions more for school construction.
Let's have marijuana tax money go to our schools rather than criminals in Mexico.
That argument falls flat with Amy Baca-Ollert, vice president of the Colorado Education Association. Baca-Ollert says legalizing marijuana contradicts the anti-drug message taught in schools.
Marijuana has impacts, negative impacts on attention span, brain development, all of these things that impact learning.
Colorado's governor and local law enforcement officials here worry about a potential conflict with federal law that makes possessing or growing marijuana a crime. Jefferson County Sheriff Ted Mink fears legalization will attract outsiders to grow here and sell to the rest of the country.
I lived in Colorado most of my life, and this is not what I think Colorado is about, is to become the marijuana capital of the United States.
State Representative Jonathan Singer supports the idea of treating marijuana like alcohol. A former drug counselor, Singer has seen the effects of drug abuse, but he says most people who use marijuana do so responsibly.
Marijuana has a potential, just like any other drug, to hurt people, and people need to make that informed decision. But this is not cocaine. This is not meth. This is not heroin.
A win here could boost legalization efforts elsewhere, while a loss would be a sign that marijuana use is one right many Americans are not willing to grant. Barry Peterson, CBS News, Denver.
We have today's updated numbers from federal health officials on the meningitis outbreak. There are now more than 200 victims in 14 states. 15 people who received the tainted steroid injections have died. In North Carolina, health officials are trying to find the source of an E. coli outbreak. One child has died and 19 others who attended a county fair were sickened by the bacteria. E. coli are found in animal waste. Coming up on tonight's CBS Evening News, just the latest vehicle to get slowed to a crawl on the streets of Los Angeles. Traffic in Los Angeles can be notoriously difficult, and it seems no vehicle is exempt, even one that weighs 75 tons and has traveled through space. Ben Tracy tonight on the plodding final procession of Endeavour.
Apparently Endeavour was struggling with the idea of retirement. When it made its triumphant entrance at the California Science Center today, it was more than 15 hours late. Even for a commute in Los Angeles, this was a whopper. It took the shuttle more than 60 hours to complete the 12-mile route from LAX to the museum. On Friday, it snuck a late-night look at a donut shop and turned the 405 freeway into a shuttle crossing.
Just such an amazing bit of technology, history, adventure.
When Endeavour arrived at the LA Forum yesterday morning, it was more than an hour ahead of schedule. Yet then, nearly everything seemed to slow the shuttle's roll.
I actually thought I missed it yesterday. When this morning I turned on the news and it was still grounded, I'm like, oh yeah, we're going to see it.
The growing crowd, some suffering dehydration in the hot sun, got in the way. Endeavour's 78-foot wingspan nearly clipped buildings and trees. Moving at just 1 mile per hour, it wasn't even giving molasses a run for its money. The city had already cut down 400 trees and raised 100 power lines to give the 5-story shuttle enough room. Yet dodging space junk is apparently easier than ducking power poles.
Wow.
Already high wires had to be lifted, while even more trees were trimmed. The shuttle lost more time when a scheduled maintenance stop stretched from 2 hours to more than 5. Yet then came the final stretch, the shuttle shuffle down Martin Luther King Jr. Boulevard, navigating historic pine trees planted in honor of the civil rights leader. In a city where 3 days of street closures are as welcome as a bad rash,
welcome home, Endeavour!
Remarkably, all of LA seemed to rally behind this lengthy shuttle endeavor. And it arrived here at the Science Center without a single scratch. Now, after 123 million miles in orbit and 12 very challenging ones here on Earth, its final mission. is now complete. Ben Tracy, CBS News, Los Angeles.
That is the CBS Evening News tonight. Later on CBS 60 Minutes, I'm Jeff Glor, CBS News in New York. Scott Pelley will be here tomorrow. Good night.
On television, online, on the go, and now free on iPad. CBS News.